What happens when trust is twisted and someone uses a dating app not for love, but to fulfill the darkest of desires? Stephen Port, later dubbed the Grindr Killer, hid behind the mask of charm and innocence, only to reveal a horrifying reality. Using social media and dating apps like Grindr, Port lured young men into his web, leaving a trail of devastation behind. But what pushed him to commit such horrendous acts, and how did he get away with it for so long? Join us as we uncover the chilling story of Stephen Port and uncover the devastating impact of his crimes. Stephen Port was born in Southend-on-Sea, Essex, on February 22, 1975. His family moved to Dagenham, East London when he was just a year old. Growing up, Port had a tough time. He was bullied in school, and his teachers described him as quite a loner. His neighbors also found his behavior odd, even childlike, noting that as an adult, he still played with children's toys. After leaving school at 16, Port initially attended art college, but his family couldn't afford the costs. He switched paths and trained as a chef for 2 years. He worked at various restaurants, most notably at a bus garage cafeteria in Barking, London, where he lived. Nothing about his early life hinted at the horrific crimes he would later commit. And it was in his mid-20s that he came out as gay. But his romantic relationships didn't last long, with some partners describing him as too immature for their liking. Port continued living with his parents until his early 30s before moving into a flat in Barking. He worked as a chef at a bus depot in West Ham and for a brief moment even appeared on an episode of MasterChef. By the time of his crimes, Port was known for his athletic build, as he frequently went to the gym. However, he was also bald, and to boost his confidence when meeting men, he wore a professionally fastened blonde toupee. But as Port matured, troubling signs began to emerge. His obsession with gay dating apps and pornography soon spiraled out of control, as he developed a particular fixation on drug-induced sexual encounters. It was only a matter of time before this dangerous combination led him down a deadly path. Stephen Port's crimes sent shockwaves through the world, not only because of their brutality, but because of how long he was able to carry on unnoticed. Over a period of 16 months between June 2014 and September 2015, Port used the dating app Grindr to lure young, vulnerable men to his flat in Barking, East London. His horrifying pattern repeated with each victim. He gained their trust, drugged them with GHB, which is a potent date rape drug, and then sexually assaulted them. All 4 known victims were killed by this method, and Port discarded their bodies near his flat, often in nearby churchyards or graveyards, making it seem like an overdose or accident. What's even more chilling is how long it took authorities to link these crimes together. Despite the close proximity of where the bodies were found and the similarities in how the men died, police didn't initially consider the deaths suspicious. This failure allowed Port to continue his killing spree. Speaking of which, Stephen Port targeted his victims through Grindr, earning him the infamous nickname the Grindr Killer. By using the app, he could easily find young men looking to socialize or date, but his intentions were far from innocent. He deliberately chose men who were vulnerable, often from the LGBTQ+ community, knowing they might be less likely to be immediately missed or believed if something went wrong. Now, did you know that Port didn't stop at just harming them physically? He further manipulated the narrative by planting false suicide notes to throw off suspicion. And so each of his victims faced the same tragic fate, an overdose of GHB, discarded in public places. But who were these victims? Let's take a closer look. The first of Port's victims was Anthony Walgate, a 23-year-old fashion student who also worked as an escort. In June 2014, Port hired Walgate under the pretense of paying him for his services. Once at Port's flat, Walgate was drugged and later found dead outside the building. What was shocking is that it was Port himself who called the police, claiming to have found Walgate's body. He pretended to be a concerned bystander. However, police quickly found inconsistencies in his story, and Port was arrested, not for murder, but for perverting the course of justice. He was later released on bail, and no further investigation into Walgate's death was pursued at the time. This failure would have catastrophic consequences. 2 months later, Gabriel Kowary, a 22-year-old Slovakian, became Port's next victim. Kowary had recently moved to London and was staying with Port, who again drugged and killed him. Kowary's body was found in a grave near Port's flat, and the police assumed it was an overdose. No significant investigation followed. Just weeks later, the body of 21-year-old Daniel Whitworth was discovered in the same churchyard where Kowary had been found. In an attempt to cover his tracks, Port planted a fake suicide note in Whitworth, claiming responsibility for Kowary's death and stating that he had taken his own life out of guilt. Despite this bizarre twist and the obvious signs of manipulation, the police took the note at face value, assuming Whitworth's death was a suicide. This allowed Port to continue his killing spree undeterred. Jack Taylor, a 25-year-old forklift driver, was Port's final known victim. Taylor was not involved in drugs, yet after being lured by Port in September 2015, he was found dead from a GHB overdose just like the others. Taylor's family, however, refused to accept the police's conclusion that their son had overdosed. They were persistent in seeking justice, eventually leading to the review of a CCTV footage from Barking Station, where Taylor was last seen. The footage showed Taylor in the company of a tall man, Stephen Port. This discovery finally led to Port's arrest on October 18, 2015. Port's killing spree could have been stopped much sooner if not for several critical failures by the Metropolitan Police. From the very start, officers failed to connect the dots between the victims, despite their bodies being found in close proximity to each other. Even when Port was arrested for lying about finding Walgate's body, his laptop was not examined, and crucial evidence, like his online searches for drugging and raping unconscious men, went unnoticed. Investigators also overlooked the suspicious circumstances surrounding the deaths of Kowary and Whitworth, particularly the fake suicide note. These missed opportunities were more than just mistakes. They cost lives. Had the police investigated more thoroughly after Walgate's death or questioned the credibility of the suicide note, Port could have been stopped before claiming his next 3 victims. These failures have been heavily criticized, with accusations that the police's handling of the case was influenced by homophobia and the lack of seriousness in dealing with crimes against gay men. Stephen Port was finally arrested after the police reviewed the CCTV footage linking him to Jack Taylor. His arrest led to a much deeper investigation, revealing not just the 4 murders, but also multiple instances of sexual assault on other men who had survived their encounters with Port. These men came forward during the trial, providing more evidence of Port's predatory behavior. Throughout the trial, Port maintained his innocence, insisting that the deaths were accidental overdoses. He denied all charges, but the evidence against him was overwhelming. Forensic investigations uncovered traces of GHB in all of the victims, and his search history revealed an unsettling obsession with drugging and raping men. The jury saw through his lies, and in November 2016, Port was convicted of 4 counts of murder, multiple rapes, and sexual assaults. On November 25, 2016, Stephen Port was sentenced to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. During the sentencing, the judge described him as a wicked and monstrous individual who had manipulated and exploited vulnerable men for his own gratification. The whole life sentence means that Port will never be released from prison. And so the case of the Grindr killer exposed significant failings in the handling of crimes against marginalized communities, particularly the LGBTQ+ community. The families of the victims have continued to campaign for justice, arguing that if the police had taken earlier warnings seriously, their loved ones might still be alive. An inquest into the case revealed systemic failings in the Metropolitan Police's investigation, but none of the officers involved faced serious consequences for their actions. The Grindr killer case remains a tragic example of how prejudice and incompetence within the justice system can have deadly consequences. Today, Port serves his life sentence, but the wounds left by his crimes and the failures that allowed him to continue are far from healed. His case stands as a grim reminder of the importance of treating all victims and communities with the seriousness they deserve. What do you think about this tragic case? Do you believe the police's failure to connect with that sooner was due to oversight? Or perhaps there was a deeper issue of prejudice at play, as many have speculated? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Thank you for joining us on this episode. If you found this story compelling, please like, share, and subscribe to stay updated with our next in-depth investigations on Real Crime Zone. See you in our next video.